What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Trafish Aquatics. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to set up a CO2 system on your aquarium. One reason you might want to run CO2 is if you want your plants to absorb more nutrients and grow faster. CO2 is definitely going to help you guys do that. In addition to the plants absorbing all those nutrients, it's going to starve out algae because those nutrients are going to be getting used by the plants instead of the algae, so it's going to help combat algae in that way. So setting up a CO2 system is pretty easy. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. There's DIY kits that you can buy that use baking soda and citric acid like this one. There's also commercially available DIY kits like the Neo CO2 kit. There's also like the Fluval CO2 kit. They're going to use CO2 gram canisters. They're available. You can usually buy those at Petco. But if you want to set up a system that's going to last a long time, be very efficient, it's going to cost more up front, but in the end, it's going to be much easier to maintain. You're going to want to do a traditional CO2 setup. And I'm going to be doing that today, and I'm going to show you guys what you need to do it yourself. It doesn't cost a whole lot of money. You can usually do it for under $200. But that being said, let me show you what you guys need. The first thing you're going to need is you're going to need a CO2 tank. If you go to your local welding supply store, or if you don't know where your local welding supply store is, go to Google, type in welding supply store, and it'll show you a map of the closest ones to you, and get yourself a 5-pound CO2 tank. This here is a 5-pound CO2 tank. This ran me $99 for the tank and the fill. And once your tank runs out, you can take it back to your welding supply store and they'll just exchange the tank for you. My supply store is going to cost anywhere between $10 to $20 for an exchange on this. And this tank set up for CO2 running 2 to 3 bubbles a second while the daylight hours are running will last about 6 to 7 months. So it's not going to be a huge upkeep cost to keep it going, so it's not that expensive and it's pretty easy to set up. So once you have your tank, you're going to want to get yourself a CO2 regulator, and this is the CO2 regulator that I have chosen, and I'll explain to you why. So a CO2 regulator is going to regulate the pressure coming off of your CO2 tank into your aquarium. The liquid CO2 in this tank is running at about 1,000 psi, and if you were to just open that tank, it would run all that CO2 into that aquarium, kill all your fish, and the tank would be empty in about a minute. The CO2 regulator hooking it up to that tank is going to reduce that from 1,000 psi down to about 50 psi, and then you can adjust this little needle valve here, and it's going to allow you to adjust it by bubble as opposed to just emptying the entire tank into your aquarium. So that's the purpose of a CO2 regulator. This regulator specifically has a bubble counter, which is going to let you see your adjustment of how many bubbles per second, so that's very good. And I like that this one's built right into the regulator. And it also has a power solenoid, so if this is not plugged in, it's not going to allow any CO2 to run into the system, and when it is plugged in, it opens up the CO2 valve and allows CO2 to run. Now, something that I like about the solenoids is you can hook up a timer, and you can actually set this to run either at the same time as your lighting, or you can set this up to turn on before your lighting comes on, so the system can build up CO2 and then turn off about an hour before the lights turn off so that it's not wasting CO2. So that's how I'm going to set mine up. The next thing you're going to need after your regulator is CO2 hose. So CO2 hose is specifically made to handle CO2. Regular airline will degrade over time with CO2 passing through it. So this airline is much stronger and it's a lot harder to bend. So you're definitely going to want to soak this in warm water, or you could just even leave it like this. But if you soak it in warm water, it'll help you run it so that you don't have all of the loops and bends in your line because it is very stiff. So after you have your CO2 line, the next thing you're going to need is a CO2 diffuser. I chose a stainless steel one. It has CO2 disc in there, and you can actually unscrew this and replace those discs if they plug up, so that's why I chose this one for maintenance purposes. But they come in all kinds of flavors, so you can pick the one that you want or the one that's appealing to you and just run it. So that's that. Now you do also have the option of buying a steel U line like this that hooks over the top of your aquarium if you're running small tanks or rimless tanks, so that you can get a cleaner application. This specific one came with my diffuser, but because of the size of this tank, it doesn't fit over the top of the aquarium, so I won't be using it. But know that if you want a cleaner install, these are available. After that, what you're going to need, and you don't have to run one of these, but I am going to, just so I can show you guys how it works, and I'll be doing another video on this specifically in the future, but this is a CO2 drop checker. And basically how it works is it has a liquid and a drop checker in it. You put that liquid in the drop checker, put that in your aquarium, and it's going to tell you if you have too much CO2, not enough CO2, or just the right amount of CO2 in your aquarium. So that way you can adjust the bubbles per second on your regulator to match how much CO2 your aquarium actually needs. So it comes in pretty handy. But that's everything you're going to need to go ahead and set this up. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to set it up. Alright guys, so arguably the hardest part about setting up a CO2 system is dialing in your regulator and attaching it to the CO2 tank. So here is the CO2 tank, here is the CO2 regulator. All we're going to do is we are going to line this up right here. Make sure your O-ring is installed, and then you can just thread it right on. So once this gets on there, you are going to need a adjustable wrench, this guy right here, because you want to make sure that this is tight. Now you don't want to over tighten it, but you do want it tight enough that it's not going to leak any CO2 gas. So that should be good right there. It doesn't really matter if this is perfectly level, right? But totally your preference, right? So what we're going to do now that this is on, we are going to, you can see the gauges there, right? This one I've already had it hooked up, so it's reading how much pressure is actually inside of the regulator currently. And this one up here is the total pressure and volume of the tank. So if I go ahead and I open up the tank, you can see how that jumped, right? So we're almost at 1,000 PSI, and I have my regulator set at about 50 PSI. It'll go up to about 90 to 100 PSI, but you don't want to run it that high because you risk blowing the line off of your bubble counter. So if you can adjust it down to a lower PSI, it's still going to run perfectly fine, and it's going to help you conserve CO2. Just my preference, right? So what we're going to do now is we have this hooked up, everything is turned on, our pressure is in. Now it's not going to release any CO2 because the CO2 regulator's solenoid is not plugged in. Here's the plug for that. And we're not going to do anything with that until the whole system is set up properly. So the next thing we need to do is we take our bubble counter here, we can unscrew the top of the bubble counter, and we need to fill this with water. So I'm going to go do that. I'll be right back. Okay, so we do have water in there now. You guys probably can't see it because it is pretty full, but let me just get this on there and show you that it does have water in it. Go ahead and get that tightened up. Now if I tip this, you guys can see the air bubble. So there is water in there. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to take this tank and put it down in the cabinet of our aquarium. So I'm going to go ahead and set it down there, readjust the camera, and show you guys everything else that needs to get set up. And the other thing that needs to happen is we need to take our CO2 diffuser and put it in the aquarium. Now what I like about this is the line is black, my background is black, so you're really not going to be able to see it. And I also have these little suction cups with clips on it that actually snap onto this line, since this line is rigid, and it's going to help keep this line up against the back of the aquarium so it's tucked out of the way, so it's not going to take up hardly any space in the aquarium. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to set the line up, show you guys the line, and then we're going to go down and look at the tank underneath. I'm going to show you guys how to hook up the line to the bubble counter. We'll hook up the timer, we'll get everything set up, and we'll get it running. Alright, so just real quick before we go down and set up the CO2 tank, you can see the diffuser right here and the line that runs up the back. So that's how you install the diffuser. Alright, so we're down here under the fish tank. We'll go ahead and we'll open up the cabinet. And as you can see, I got my CO2 line running right there. So what we're going to do is we are going to hook up our CO2 line. Got the tank right here. We just have to take off this little nut on the top. This is actually what locks our CO2 line onto the bubble counter. So we'll just grab our line here, kind of uncoil it a little bit. Now if you have trouble getting your CO2 lines on either here or your diffuser, just run them under hot water. It'll soften the material. You can get it on. As it cools, it will harden. Make sure you put this nut on your line before you put it on here, otherwise you're not going to be able to get it on. So we'll go ahead and we'll push our line down onto our bubble counter. Tighten up this nut. Get that locked in there. Okay, so now we can set our CO2 tank in place. I'm just going to set it right there, front and center, make it look real fancy. So what we're going to do now, we got to hook up our solenoid on our diffuser up to a timer. My lights run from 3:30 in the afternoon till 11 o'clock at night. So I have this timer set from 2:30 in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, like I explained before, so you can run the CO2 to make it the most efficient it can be during your lighting cycle. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to plug this in. Unfortunately, all the plugs down here are 2-prong. This is 3-prong, so I have to plug this into my wife's Bearded Dragon outlet up top. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this in, and then I'll show you guys how to turn this on and dial it in. Alright guys, so I'm going to go ahead and plug it in so you can hear the solenoid activate. So if you listen real carefully, you'll hear a click. And that's the sound of the solenoid activating. So now we can go ahead and dial in our CO2. So let's go ahead and get that turned on, and I'll show you guys how to dial it in. Alright guys, so what we're going to want to do now is we're going to want to open the valve on our CO2 tank. Make sure we have CO2 available. Make sure we're reading personal preference. I like 50 psi going in to the needle valve, 1000 psi in the tank. And then we're just going to go to our needle valve here and slowly adjust it. And you'll start seeing bubbles. So you can see the bubbles come out really fast there. So we're going to turn it back until we get about 2 to 3 bubbles a second. Which is about that. That's 2 to 3 bubbles a second right there. So we're going to go ahead and leave that. And we're going to go ahead, we're going to install our bubble counter. And I'm not going to show you guys the installation of the bubble counter right now because I am doing another video on that, so make sure you stay tuned for that video. So for right now, we'll set this back here, and once the diffuser starts releasing CO2, I will show you guys what that looks like. Alright guys, so like you can see here, we do have big bubbles coming out of the diffuser, and that's because I didn't soak it for a day before setting it up. So you are going to see these larger bubbles coming out of the diffuser, but as that diffuser stone does soak in the water, the bubbles are going to start coming out a lot slower and smaller and be able to diffuse into the water better. So that is going to happen over time, but I'll show you guys that when we go ahead and do the bubble counter video. And hopefully we can get all these plants really thriving and try and cut down on some of this algae that's on the glass. So that'll help starve it out. So that's it. That's how you set up a CO2 system. Alright guys, like I said, I hope you enjoyed the video on how to set up a CO2 system on your aquarium. Basically, once you get it set up like this, you're going to want to start off at about 1 bubble per second and then work your way up depending on what your drop checker says. And like I said, video coming soon on this drop checker. I know I can start off at 2 to 3 bubbles a second based on the size of the aquarium and how many plants are actually in this aquarium. So I know I can start off a little bit higher, but I am going to fine tune it and dial it in once I get that drop checker installed. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something new. Hope this video is helpful. As always, thank you guys for watching Trapfish Aquatics. Links in the description down below if you need medications or anything like that. And I will see you guys in the next video.